Well, thank you. It is an honor to be here at NatCon 24, and we all know that we are meeting at an urgent moment, and the urgency has been made clear by some events just even over the last couple of years that have been very sobering. When last I had the opportunity to address this movement in late 2022, I spoke on the impossibility of a secular state. What I want to speak about today is the impotence of a secular conservatism. And I don't mean thereby to divide the room, but rather to speak honestly about where I think we are and what I think we should be thinking. I do speak as a Christian. I do speak as a theologian. I speak, I think, with a great deal of common concern and common cause among all of us here. So I appreciate the invitation, and I want to say that the bomb that is in the background of my consideration, just to see a part of it, would be the Dobbs decision and the aftermath. I have been a part of the pro-life movement my entire adult life. I've had the privilege of being in rooms where major decisions have been made, strategies have been laid, and where facts and analytics have been considered. And I can tell you that there are those, and were those, who were quite convinced that this is an argument we were winning, that we were winning it self-evidently, that we were not winning it evenly, but the confidence was that if indeed all those years of work in conservative argument and conservative organizing and in what became a conservative legal recovery, a constitutional recovery, if that led to a reversal of Roe v. Wade, we would be ready for it. And we would discover a pent-up pro-life conviction on the part of the American people, certainly in key states painted red, where we would see pro-life conviction translated into pro-life legislation. And of course, what we've seen is exactly the opposite, beginning in Kansas, but also in my own Kentucky, where all of a sudden, the bomb went off just announcing to us that whatever commitment there was to the pro-life cause, to the sanctity of human life, to the life of the unborn, it was much less ontological than we had thought. It was much less convictional than we had thought. And that leads me to the consideration for today. To be conservative is to hold allegiance to certain fixed truths and principles. Now, I'm old enough to remember in my own adult lifetime the argument that that basically means a conservative temperament and a conservative commitment to timeless tradition. The problem, I want to argue, is that the tradition without a fundamental commitment to truth, and that truth being fundamentally transcendent and theological, will soon evaporate. I would take that further and insist on fixed religious truths as well as traditions. I would underline that these fixed religious truths are grounded in specific acts of divine revelation on which we are entirely dependent. 2 points of urgency I want to make. Number one, conservatism is not just another form of liberalism. And then secondly, conservatism is not just liberalism or progressivism arriving later on the schedule, with greater respect for the costs and challenges of what is defined as inevitable social and moral progress. Now, cutting ahead, I believe the great challenge that now confronts conservatives, and I mean conservative Christians here as well, of course, but conservatives writ large in the United States, but I speak with particular relevance to religious conservatives and American evangelicals. The great challenge is understanding that any worldview that does not ground itself in divine revelation, in the moral character of the self-existent, omnipotent, omniscient God, any conservative tradition that is not grounded in a prior commitment to ontology as well as tradition, it's going to evaporate. The only question is, will that happen quickly or more slowly? Now, one of the things we've seen in recent weeks, as a matter of fact, just in recent days, the collapse of the Conservative Party in Great Britain. I follow that party and that Anglo-American tradition very closely, and the argument I made in an article published immediately after the election is that we should not be surprised because the Conservative Party had abandoned conservatism. And I would point to an incident just, that taken place now more than a decade ago when David Cameron the British Prime Minister, head of the Tory party, just basically came out and suggested that the party abandon what had been a very long-standing commitment to social conservatism, and indeed even to the definition of marriage as the union of a man and a woman. And he said, I don't do this despite the fact I'm a conservative, but because I am a conservative. And at that point, it was just like the entire ontological structure of creation order was just denied by a party that calls itself conservative. I don't believe a party that does such a thing should expect to not only a conservative reputation, but any confidence among those who know what is at stake. I'm not denying the importance of social traditions, morals, political principles, constitutional norms with you and with all conservatives. I want to emphasize how important that stewardship is. But I do want to argue that it all is a matter of constant negotiation and a process we are losing and are destined to lose unless the fixed traditions are grounded in revealed truth. Now, when you consider the challenges we face right now, it's impossible to say they are not ontological. We're living in a society that increasingly believes a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy. Now, just in terms of fundamental ontology, if we don't understand anything else, we would just understand that it has been assumed rightly throughout virtually all of human history that anatomy and ontology are definitive and determinative and frankly are not impositions but gifts. But we live in a time in which the progressive idea of personal autonomy has now reached the point that we are autonomous from ontology. I think it demonstrates the fact that when you have a conservative movement that is not itself committed to ontology, it's all just a matter of endless negotiation. The ontological grounding of the American order was made very clear in the Declaration of Independence and in other founding documents. When the founders spoke of nature and nature's God, when we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that's a language that is not just decorative. It is not just illustrative. That is hearkening back to what in the Lutheran tradition is referred to as creation order. And I'm glad to say behind that the affirmation of what might rightly be called a natural law. The point is, it is a created order, it is a revealed order, and it is an order. Behind that order is the God of the Bible, the God of Genesis. Now, one of the interesting things is, of course, that would have been non-controversial at the time of the American founding. For one reason, the set of intellectual circumstances at the time was such that prior to Darwin, there was really no other explanation for why the world existed, why we exist. Historians, in particular, often refer to the early American period as that of a Protestant empire. The inheritance of Christendom, a very clear biblical worldview, and as I said, it really wasn't that there was another available worldview. You know, this is where Richard Dawkins' interesting statement was, it was impossible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist until Darwin. And so you do see this great break in modernity and the arrival of a modern secular metaphysic and what was claimed to be at least a modern secular ontology. But it's an ontology that comes with absolutely nothing determinative. We hold these truths. We hold rights endowed by our Creator. It's based in a Christian ontology and morality, which is based upon Jewish antecedents in both general and special revelation. The secular experiment that is now underway and has been for some time is now seen in retrospect as that which is based upon actually nothing at all, nothing ontological, nothing in terms of reality, no particular metaphysic. You see this referenced now in open arguments that they are making, in which the left no longer shares any moral order, and even now it certainly rejects the ontology and the ontological commitments of the Christian tradition. You look at American history, the Protestant Empire, the Christian consensus, and we understand the rise of conservatism, which came as a response to the early cleavages in our society, and in particular, I think of the Wilsonian period and beyond in the 20th century. And then all of a sudden there was this enormous appreciation among many conservative Americans for the work of someone like Edmund Burke. And there was, I would say, a half-hearted appropriation of Burke. The right half was an understanding the importance of the tradition and the binding authority of tradition. The unhelpful part was that many people did not bring with that what Burke clearly affirmed, and that is an ontological order behind that tradition, truth behind that tradition. You look in the United States and you understand that even much of what's been called conservative turns out to be either a conservatism, which is another form of liberalism, or conservatism is nothing but an attempt at a delayed fuse. And I would say you look back at previous Republican administrations and you understand that, we can see that that's exactly the strategy that was undertaken. The post-Dobbs position now makes that very clear, even in conversations within the Republican Party. Behind all of this is also the Reagan Revolution, and behind that, William Buckley, National Review, Fusionism. I'm not denying that Christian conservatives can have secular allies. I'm not denying that we can have vast areas of common agreement and common concern. But I am saying that at the end of the day, without an ontological commitment which is grounded in theological conviction, I don't believe there's any lasting conservatism to be found. It's because it has to be a commitment to truth, because it's going to be very costly. And it is because if this is not revealed truth to which we are accountable, in other words, if this is just another theory to be placed alongside competing theories, an argument to be placed alongside other arguments, if that's all there is to it, we are doomed. That is not what I believe is at the very core of our argument and at the core of our convictions. An impotent conservatism that is grounded in no ontology cannot sustain itself, cannot perpetuate itself, it cannot accomplish its stated aims, it cannot defend its most basic principles and postulates. Now, if you want to see evidence of that, just look at the collapse of Protestant liberalism, where you see, and last year is the 100th anniversary of J. Gresham Machen's famous book, Christianity and Liberalism, in which he rightly said, we're not talking about two variants of Christianity, we're talking about two different religions. And as you look at that, you recognize nothing proves this point, sadly enough, as much as the tragedy of liberal Protestantism, which is just so accommodationist that it's become a cartoon of the age. What we see in the larger society is the collapse of conviction, the replacement of Christianity with a new religion. That's why we shouldn't be surprised by the rise of Marxism in all its different forms, critical theory. It is a reminder to us that when Adolf von Harnack, the German liberal, said what you need to do is separate the kernel and the husk of Christianity, you keep the kernel, which is religious experience, basically, and you get rid of the husk, which is the claims of divine revelation, what you end up with is, the experiment of European decadence. A secular conservatism cannot meet the challenge of the day, and an accommodationist Christianity will do no better. A flimsy theism will disappear in the mists of modernity. In Robert Kagan's latest book, he makes the argument, liberalism is not inherently about progress, therefore, except the progress that comes from the expanding recognition of people's rights. It has no teleology, no final resting point toward which it aims. Into the quote. What an amazing statement. He admits there is no end game to liberalism. It is an endlessly open game with no teleology at all. There is no ultimate goal. It's the unfolding of inevitable Hegelian progress. And you look at that and you recognize the only answer to that cannot be anything short of ontology, and that ontology has to be grounded in theism. Cardinal Manning, an unusual person for an evangelical Christian Protestant to cite, said something profoundly true and nearly irreducible in terms of words. He said famously, all human conflict is ultimately theological. I want to end by saying this is exactly what it is. It is ultimately theological. There may be the claim that there's no theology here. Don't believe your eyes. But the reality is all human conflict is ultimately theological. It is good to know what the alternatives are. It is good to know the challenge we face. It is good to speak honestly We face the most insidious attacks upon human dignity and the sanctity of life, the goodness of marriage and family, the structures of human society, even the reality of good and evil, and the transcendent reality, the good, the beautiful, and the true. Our answer to that cannot be less than political. Our answer to that cannot be less than cultural. It cannot be less than strategic. And I also want to say it cannot be less than theological. And it is good that we acknowledge that fact. I speak as a Christian theologian. I do not want to confuse Christian theology with some vague idea of nationalism. I want to say that I do not believe this nation and all that it represents can survive abandoning its theological roots. Thank you for your time. May God bless America.